welcome to the 5th episode of the Cycle Spotlight, where I'm speaking with industry leaders about all things software engineering and DevOps through the lens of our platform, Cycle.io. Today, I'm really excited to be speaking with Head of Engineering at Busify, Dement. He has an acute knowledge of building software systems and good tech with tenure at the Weather Channel and Calendly. And so it's a great pleasure to have you on today, Casey. I'm really curious to get your perspective about a couple of things because you have experience with Kubernetes and ECS, even building your own orchestrator. And so I'm curious, what are some situations where a company might want to steer clear of adopting Kubernetes?
Well, the important thing to understand with Kubernetes is that Kubernetes is a tool that requires a lot of configuration and understanding about that configuration. So you've got your cluster of servers themselves, you've got systems that need to run outside of that cluster that are used to manage the cluster, various different software daemons and in-memory databases that are used to schedule everything. And it's gotten a little bit easier over time with things like K8s, where you don't have to know how to manually configure all of it to get it working in the first place. But even with those systems, you still need to have a pretty decent understanding of what's going on with Kubernetes to really optimize those systems and make sure that they're operating properly and giving you the best capability. And even worse, if something goes wrong, being able to somehow repair those capabilities can be extremely complicated. And for that, you need people who understand exactly what they're doing. For that reason, I typically wouldn't recommend Kubernetes to any organization that doesn't have at least dedicated sysadmins on staff. People who are comfortable getting in, managing daemons at the operating system level, being able to configure those systems, because you can pretty much turn Kubernetes on and use it without that, using a system like K8s, but to really get optimal use out of Kubernetes, to be able to handle issues that come up in production with Kubernetes, you're going to need that level of skill. You're not going to be able to really effectively make that tool work for you over the long term if you're just working with web developers. And so, for me, I steered very clear of Kubernetes in the current arrangement that I'm in because I didn't have that staff. I don't have someone on hand that can handle those kind of problems when they arise. So I needed something where I didn't need to have that capability.
Yeah, makes total sense. And a lot of the times, Kubernetes, if you have some experience with it, it's relatively easy to get going. But once you're up and running and scaling, the complexity tends to grow with you. And so what are some of these implications of adopting Kubernetes if you don't have the right ecosystem to support it?
Well, right off the top, there is a database. I'm trying to remember, I think it's etcd is the name of it. But there's a database that Kubernetes uses to manage all of its state. And that cluster system is particularly difficult to repair if it has a problem. I was working when we first started dealing with Kubernetes, I was working with some absolutely brilliant, very experienced senior infrastructure architects who were setting that up and managing it. And when we had problems, those guys were hitting brick walls. They were befuddled. And these are rock stars that were having problems figuring out how to repair that system. So, when I think about that, and then I think about a small organization that doesn't have that kind of staff on hand, if they had an actual problem happen, they're just going to be stuck. There's absolutely no way they're going to be able to repair that. They're essentially going to have to wipe everything and start over, which is not really much of an option for a business in terms of business continuity.
Right. Yeah, it makes total sense. And I think, lastly, if you were to start again at any of your spots, what's some of the early decisions that you can make to put yourself in a position to succeed long term?
So I think where a lot of organizations run into trouble when they're making decisions early on is, and this is a very natural thing, when when your survival depends upon getting something into market as fast as possible. And whether or not you're making choices that are going to be scalable, that are going to be extensible, that are going to be maintainable or not, doesn't impact the success of getting that into market at all, then spending a lot of extra time trying to address those concerns at that point becomes untenable. Like, who would do that? Who would spend an extra 3 months on something that's not going to have any effect on whether or not you can get into market? And so people tend to make a lot of decisions just based on, let's just get it out the door, get it working, we'll come back and fix it later. And in fact, I've even heard people say outright, yeah, that'll be a problem later, but it's going to be a problem at a point when we have a lot more money and a lot more resources, and so we'll have the ability to fix it. And so there's a tendency to glaze over a lot of things in those early stages. And I think a lot of that is perfectly fine if, when you're making those decisions, you're thinking about like what your off-ramp is, right? Like if you create a situation where all of your developers are maintaining systems directly in production, where your engineers are going in, they can shell into those boxes in production, they can make direct changes, they can see all of the secrets in production, like that probably is fine for the first month that you launch the application. But at some point, a year or two down the road, that's not going to be fine. That's not going to be okay at all. If you ever wanted to do an IPO, if you're going to do technical due diligence with someone who's considering investing in you, when you get to a serious technical investor, when they start looking at those sorts of things, they're going to have serious problems with that. And it's going to affect the valuation of your company in very material ways. So thinking about when you're making that choice of, yeah, we're not going to implement that yet, but thinking about, okay, when we implement it, what is that going to look like? And the thing that we're building right now, is that something that's going to be easy to change into that later? Makes a big difference, because if you don't have that thought process going on, then it's very likely that when it's time to implement those things, when it's time to make the change, you're going to discover that that's going to be extremely difficult to do if you haven't planned for it. You know, it's that difference between, we don't need to build the thing we need tomorrow today, but we need to think about what the thing we need tomorrow was going to be and make sure that the thing we build today is compatible with that future vision.
Have a plan for the future and know how you're going to execute on it. Well, this was great, Casey. I really appreciate you joining today and the conversation. So until next time, have a good one.
You too, Connor.